My name is Jeff Morgan. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I wanted to bring an update on a couple of things that happened last week and this upcoming week that we should be looking forward to. So as many of you know, we've been fighting for family law reform, and there comes a point, I believe, that if the family law reform is not going to take place, we should be considering civil disobedience. I'm not going to talk about this right now, but this is something that I think needs to be part of the discussion. We need to start talking about what do we need to do to reform family law, because it is unjust, it is immoral in many respects, it is evil and wicked. And we've petitioned our legislators, we've gone to various courts, we've gone all over the place, and it seems like again and again and again we are greeted with silence, indifference. There are some people that actually are for us, but the majority of them try to use arguments against us. And I think that we need to start considering the idea of civil disobedience in order to start to make reforms that are necessary. Unfortunately, it's come to that in other places and other times. I'm not talking about violent disobedience. I'm talking about peaceful, nonviolent, civil disobedience to bring about family law reform in the state of Texas. And maybe even to abolish the entire system. It's that unjust, that hideously evil. Anyway, this past week, a few of us went down to Austin. We got to speak before the grievance oversight committee of the bar. I guess it was a subcommittee that reports to the Supreme Court, or a subcommittee of the Supreme Court. To be honest with you, I didn't really know the structure 100%. I was not completely familiar with the process. Other people actually were able to look at it a little bit further and probably be more adept and more concise in their testimony. I spoke on in front of the committee about the issue of fraud, and fraud within the family law industry, fraud among attorneys. There is a 2022 occupational fraud report. It's called the Report to the Nation. It's actually put out by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. And one of the things that you learn from that is that fraud is global. Fraud infiltrates every single occupation. It is worldwide. It is something that attorneys don't go to law school and all of a sudden they become exempt or immune from fraud. They don't become saints. There's not like saint attorney, family law attorney. No. These are still people that do things to create fraud within the industry and that profit by fraud. The difference between many industries and the family law attorneys, for example, or the legal profession as a whole, is that whereas fraud is often committed against a company and the company loses, and maybe they have reputational loss and customers lose things like that, and then you hire an attorney to help you combat fraud or to take it to the legal courts. When you have attorneys that are committing fraud, there is really no incentive for them to report on each other. So, and again, within the attorney profession, there is fraud. We know this. I've had attorneys tell me about things that have gone on. I've talked to the judges. Some judges know what's taking place. And one of the things that I found very interesting is that as far as fraud is concerned, how do you discover fraud? This report to the Nation said that 42% of the cases were discovered by tips. And of those tips that came in, about 55% of the tips came from employees. In other words, insiders. Within the family law profession, I don't see 55% of the tips being given by other family law attorneys. And that should really concern me, because in addition to everything else, attorneys do have a duty to report misconduct, and yet they're not reporting misconduct. This is another scheme that should be looked at as well. Attorneys should be able to report on other attorneys without fear of retaliation from judges. And I know that this takes place. I had an attorney talk to me in Collin County. This was a couple of years ago. He had been a police officer. He left the police officer ranks because he did not want to have quotas for speeding tickets. He thought that was unfair. So then he became an attorney. And he went through a divorce, and some of his friends said, hey, why don't you do family law? Because family law, you can make a lot of money really fast. And so that's what he started to do, but then he left that as well. He was in the process of leaving that. He had a couple of cases he was wrapping up, but he said, Jeff, I'm a Christian and I have to be able to sleep with my conscience at night. Family law attorneys make a boatload of money, as we know. On the way down to this conference, I was listening to one attorney talk about her fees, and she was representing an ISD, and her fees were $290 an hour for the work that she did. Family law attorneys regularly charge at least $400 an hour. Not all, but most of them do. And as some people know, that in one case I've heard of an attorney charging Well, one case it was $550 an hour, another case $650 an hour. For what is the question? And one of the big things with fraud is billing schemes. And like in this instance, for example, this attorney that talked about this was Jake Gilbreth. In 2017, he was charging $400 an hour. And it's amazing how from 2017 to 2022, his fee has increased to $650 an hour. In spite of COVID and everything else, he's up there, he's got to make his money, right? $650 an hour. And he took an oath before Judge Jan Seufer and swore that his fees were reasonable, customary, and necessary. And yet the interesting thing was the other attorney, Colleen Kinsler, she basically took the same oath, and she said that her fees were either $300 or $350. I think it was $350 an hour. Same area of expertise, same type of practice, and yet her fees were $350 an hour. His fees were $650 an hour. They both swore this under oath. Who was lying? Somebody was lying to the judge, unless they selectively chose the fees that fit their particular scheme. But this is the billing scheme. It is something that is being done. It is one of the big things that you find in fraud. There are billing schemes that take place. And anyway, with this situation here with Jake Gilbreth, and I don't know that Jake did this. Jake, feel free to respond. Love to hear from you. But oftentimes these attorneys that charge these big dollar amounts, they tell their clients that we're going to make your husband or we're going to make your wife pay for the attorney fees. So the incentive then for them is to get the most expensive attorney that they can, assuming that more expensive means better attorney, because that's how they sell it, right? I charge this much because I win. I'm out there, and not only do I win, but we're going to stick it to your ex-spouse. We're going to stick it to so-and-so. We're going to make them pay the attorney fee. So you're out $0. Well, in this instance with Jan Seufer, that did not happen. But once again, I mean, this is a billing scheme. It's a fraudulent scheme. We've had Terrence Champagne confront Daryl Weinman, an attorney, a family law attorney down in Austin, about her billing scheme, and Taryn just tore her apart. And I believe she's under investigation right now, as she should be. She was charging $550 an hour, and the very interesting thing was that the Bureau of Labor Statistics said that attorneys in the area, their fees, I believe, were $75 an hour, approximately. But Daryl Weinman was throwing in overhead and this, that, and everything else, and her experience and the novelty of the case took up to $550 an hour. And yet, as bad as Daryl Weinman was, Jake Gilbreth was even worse. $650 an hour. $650 an hour. Whereas an attorney who was defending a school district was charging $290 an hour. And she even cut her fees a little bit because there were a few reasons for that. But I find it very interesting that family law attorneys have such an opinion about themselves that they think that they are worth $500, $600, even more dollars an hour. So anyway, billing schemes and fraud within the attorney profession as far as with billing schemes. And again, the fact that attorneys do not report attorneys regarding these billing schemes. One of the things that you find with fraud that comes from tipsters is that they often use a hotline. So with regard to the hotline and the tipsters that actually make tipster in the hotline, there are usually three different methods of approach that people use, three different mechanisms, and that would be telephone calls, that would be email, that would be online form submissions. The interesting thing is that in 2012, most people used telephones, and then I think it was online form submission and email, and in 2022, those things have reversed, so that email is the number one mechanism that people use to report fraud or to give tips about a fraudulent case, online forms, and then telephone calls. I think that's the order anyway, but once again, 55%, I believe, was the percentage that came from insiders. And yet you don't see this happening within the attorney profession. You very seldom see attorneys reporting attorneys for fraud, either for fear of retaliation or for fear of being blackballed. And they certainly will not report the fraud that the judges are committing and the injustices that the judges are committing, because they know that if they say something against a judge and their name's attached to it, there will be retaliation. As I mentioned, that one person told me, and maybe I didn't finish that thought, but that one person up in Collin County who told me that he needed to get out of the family law industry and so on. I asked him if I could quote him, if I could if I could do an interview with him and put it online. He said, no, you can't do this because they will retaliate against me and my business will go bankrupt. I will not have any business, no clients coming to me. So this is the fear that the attorneys have. The attorneys have a professional duty to report. They have a moral and an ethical duty to report, and yet they are afraid to report because of retaliation by judges or being blacklisted within the attorney profession. So that's kind of the way that I addressed the issue, was with fraud. And there were other people that did a much better job than I did, but I hope to have some of the videos. We were not allowed to videotape at the beginning, so I thought, but it turned out that they were allowing us to videotape. So a few people took some videos, and there's some audios out there too. I'm going to see if I can compile them, put them together. It was very interesting because to me that committee was extremely interested in what we were saying. They wanted to hear because they were, again, reporting to, I believe it was a subcommittee of the Supreme Court, something like that. And for me, it was also an educational experience. I learned some stuff that I didn't know. And all I can say is this: you don't have to know everything when you go down to testify about the family court injustices. Say what you know. Speak from your area of strength and expertise. And you know, I found that there were a lot of people that they would give us advice on what we should look at. And again, for me personally, it was an educational experience. I thought the committee members were wonderful. They gave me some stuff to look at. The lady in charge of the committee said, because my time kind of ran out, they gave us between 15, 20, 25 minutes, something like that. But at a certain point, I had spoken maybe about 20 minutes, I think. And I didn't even get to some of the solutions. So she told me afterwards, send us your solutions. So I'm planning to do that. Probably sometime during the course of this week, I will send them in, at least the proposed solution, something that we can do to clean up this industry.